Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Swindon Spring Festival, which we hoped was going to be a live event. We planned for it to be live, especially this event, which would have been tremendous live in our town hall, which is home to Swindon Dance. But alas, because of a nasty little virus, we've had to stop bringing large numbers of people into confined spaces and instead lock ourselves away. But we don't like the word cancel. We were very keen to at least salvage something from the festival. And so what we've decided to do, as you can see, is do things online and so have a kind of mini virtual festival. So you'll be seeing our authors, as you already have some, online like this. So here's another one for you. We hope all is well where you are, by the way. Now let's get on with this event. We're very pleased that our today's author was able to join us, because he would have joined us towards the end of the festival when we would have had a lot of words and we'd have been ready to move our bodies a bit. So we're delighted to welcome Peter Lovatt with his book, The Dance Cure. Peter, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the Swindon Spring Festival. I'm delighted to be part of it.
Well, that's very nice. You're not in Swindon now, you're far away. Have you ever been to Swindon before?
Not knowingly. No, but I feel mentally I've been to Swindon a lot, because I know some people who dance at Swindon Dance. And so I understand the importance of Swindon Dance and the amazing work they do. So I know a lot about Swindon Dance, but unfortunately I haven't knowingly been to Swindon.
Well, we'll make sure we have you back another time. In a moment, I shall be asking Peter some questions that festival followers have asked me to ask him, and that I have myself from reading his lovely book, which is just full of good things. But before that, it's lovely if we like our authors to introduce their book for themselves. You've switched on to this, after all, to hear them, not me. So will you please join me in giving a Swindon Spring Festival welcome once again to Dr. Peter Lovatt and his book, The Dance Cure. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Well, here I am, so hello. Thank you for joining me online. I'm really sorry I can't be there with you. I would have loved to have been in the room so we could have got groovy together, but we'll have to get groovy virtually across the internet. So as you've heard, my name is Dr. Peter Lovatt, and this is my book, The Dance Cure, which I'm very proud of. Yeah, very proud of my book, The Dance Cure. Perhaps I shouldn't be so proud. My mum always said, you know, pride always comes before a fall. So maybe I should temper that a little bit. So what's The Dance Cure all about? Well, the basis of The Dance Cure, it comes from two ideas. Firstly, that I think we are born to dance. And secondly, I believe that dance is transformative. So we all have that sense, that urge, that natural desire to dance when we're born. Even 2-day-old babies feel that urge to dance. And I know, and I've seen through scientific research and through my own practice and through working with other people, the amazing transformative effect that dance has on people's lives. And it has an amazing impact on 4 areas of people's lives. It changes people socially. So when you get social groups together, they come together and they move together, then amazing things happen. Secondly, it changes people cognitively. So it changes the way that people think and solve problems when you get people moving. The third thing is, of course, it has a physical impact on people. It changes their heart rate. It changes the way their brain works. It changes a whole set of stuff about them to do with their physical makeup. And the fourth change that happens when people dance is that you get an amazing change emotionally. Dancing can be an extraordinary cathartic experience, that release of pent-up emotion that we feel. We live in a very strange world where movement is incredibly restricted. And imagine where you go to work and the only movements you're really allowed to do are those movements which are necessary for the job that you're doing. You know, you walk to the bus stop and there's a certain style of walking. You can't really groove and step ball change down the high street on the way to catch the bus. And you can't stand at a bus stop and have a wiggle without people thinking you're crazy. But I think that's terrible. All of that is terrible. And when we do move our bodies in a much more natural way, then extraordinary things happen. So for me, like millions of people who dance and who understand that amazing thing that happens to people when they dance. For me, dance has always played the most important part of my life. And in those parts of my life where I haven't danced, then, oh my word, the dark clouds come in, you know, those black dogs come over, and it's not very nice. So for me, dance has always been this extraordinary thing. And this is why I wrote this book. I've written a book previously called Dance Psychology, which describes all of the science of dancing and what happens in the brain when we dance from a very scientific perspective. But I wanted to write a book that everyone could read and everyone could engage with and recognize the beauty of dance in there. So the story of why I wrote the book really goes back a very long way. When I was at school, I was a school child, I would never, ever, ever have imagined I could have written a book. And the reason for that was because I simply couldn't even read a book. I was a very late starter with reading. And for me, reading and writing just felt like terrible forms of expression. I couldn't engage with them, and I didn't engage with them. When I was sat in a classroom, when I was 11, 12, 13 years of age, I felt captive, and I felt like somewhat of a prisoner. My head felt closed in, my emotions felt angry, my interpersonal interactions weren't very good, and I did feel physically trapped, sitting behind that desk, day after day after day. I hated school. I hated school with a passion. And I hated it really because I couldn't read and write very well. And when you can't read and write very well when you're at school, then of course, it's really hard to learn stuff because people want to teach you stuff through the written word. They want to show you books like this, and they say, read this. And then they say, read this, learn it, and then we'll test you on it. And I couldn't. I'd looked at this and it made no sense at all when I was trying to read. The words didn't make sense. But I was enormously lucky because in my school, we had a school dance group, and the dance group was called Colour Supplement. And I joined Colour Supplement because for me, when I danced, I just felt different. I felt a whole range of different stuff. I'll read you a bit from the book in a moment about that, how I felt different when I danced. But when I danced, I felt different. I felt free, my mind felt different. And when I sat in a classroom learning English or geography, I felt closed in and I felt terrible. I was very lucky that I had that outlet at school. We know, for instance, that poor readers tend to display higher levels of antisocial behavior than good readers. They're more likely to get into trouble. They're less likely to have a larger group of friends. They're less likely to be successful at school. There's a whole set of negatives wrapped around being a poor reader. We know, for instance, that our prisons are full of people who are poor readers, which can't be a coincidence that so many poor readers end up on the other side of the law. I was enormously lucky that I danced. And when I danced, I felt fantastic and it gave me an outlet. Although I left school without any qualifications, I left school having danced a lot. And I got a place, luckily, at eventually the Guildford School of Acting and Dance, where I went to train as a dancer. And then I left drama school and I became a professional dancer. And I toured around the world dancing, which I absolutely loved. But I always had this kind of chip on my shoulder and I felt really stupid and really thick. And the reason I felt thick and stupid was because I had no qualifications. Well, actually, the only things I had loads of certificates of failure. Because when you're at school and you fail English and you fail geography and you fail everything else, then you get an F. You're a certified failure at school. You get these negative grades and they stay with you. They become like tattoos on your body. They become part of your identity. So although I was a dancer and I loved being a dancer and I worked professionally for a number of years, I always had this chip on my shoulder that I was thick or stupid and a bit, second class to everybody else. And one day there was a significant change. I was doing panto at the Richmond Theatre, and in the rehearsal process for that show, it occurred to me that I wasn't stupid. It occurred to me that I couldn't be stupid. And the reason that I changed the way my mind was thinking about this was because of all the complex movement patterns that I was learning. And I thought, well, the musicians came in on day one of rehearsal and they had their musical score and they could learn that. And the actors came in with their books and they could read the words from their books. But when dancers came in, We came in, and then a choreographer would just say, we'll have one of those, and a bump, 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 boom. And we just had to learn these movement patterns. But you wouldn't just learn a few movement patterns, you'd learn 2 hours worth of choreography. And with all this choreography you're learning and dancing, and you just have to remember it. There's nobody writing it down. There's nobody filming it, trying to remember it for later on. There's no conductor keeping you in time. You just have to learn and remember it. And it's a massive mental skill. So when I realized that as a dancer who's capable of learning all of that stuff, then we can't be stupid. It's crazy to identify ourselves in that way. So I then decided to try to use what I knew about dance to help me to overcome my reading difficulty. I thought I would try to use what I knew about learning patterns of movement to learn patterns of words, and then to learn patterns of sentences and paragraphs, and trying to understand the world in that way. So I set about trying to learn to read. And I was in my early 20s then, I was 22, 23. And when you learn to read when you're 22, 23, then lots of the reading material can seem, well, it reinforces the idea that you're a failure and you're a bit stupid, because it shows you that very young children can learn these patterns, and you think, well, you can't. And if I can't do it, but young children can, there must be something really badly wrong with me. Psychologically, I got over that and learned to read. And when I did learn to read, it was just the most extraordinary thing in the world. It was extraordinary because once I learned to read, I would open a book and it would be like going through a wardrobe into Narnia. It was extraordinary. You come into this world, and between these covers of books, there will be a whole new world in there which you had no idea existed before you opened those pages. And so when I discovered that, I got interested in all kinds of literature, in history and geography. I loved Tolstoy. Oh, I loved all kinds of work. And I mean, I fell in love with a character in Anna Karenina. And I'd never fallen in love with a written character before, but falling in love with this character was such an amazing new experience. So once I got the reading bug, I then did an A-level in psychology, and I scraped a pass at A-level psychology. I got a grade D. And then after that, I applied to university and they all turned me down. So the next year I did an A-level in English, and I was studying for this A-level in English, and I applied again to university, and I got a place at university in London. And it was lucky because I then failed the A-level in English. But luckily the university had given me a place based on my A-level in psychology. And so I did my first degree in psychology and English. And then my second degree was in neural computation, which is a mathematical modeling of brain functions. And then my PhD was in experimental cognitive psychology, so trying to understand how the mind and the brain processes language and memory and what happens to the brain when it goes wrong. And then after that, I was then at Cambridge University. And at Cambridge University, I was in the Faculty of English there, but working as a psychologist and a scientist, trying to understand about language and trying to understand how the brain learns different languages. And it was while I was trying to understand language from a scientific perspective that I thought, actually, the most important language we have is the way we move our body, the way we communicate with our body, the way that we connect people with our bodies, and the way that the human brain can understand somebody else's body movement. It's just extraordinary. And so at that point, I thought, well, what I really want to understand is take all of that science, all of the neuroscience, and apply it to dance, and apply it to understanding what happens to human beings when they dance, both in their brain, their bodies, their minds, all over them, what happens in their heart even. So then I set up the Dance Psychology Lab in an attempt to understand the science of dance and dancers in the same way we were trying to understand the science of language and about memory and all that stuff. So that was where I did. So I then spent a large number of years working at the university, trying to understand what happens to people when they dance. So for instance, we know that people with Parkinson's disease, when people with Parkinson's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disorder, which leads to physical, it might lead to a tremor, it might lead to poor walking and balance, it leads to a whole range of both physical and non-physical symptoms. But what's extraordinary is a research study came out in about 2007, which showed that when people with Parkinson's disease, when they dance, then some of their symptoms become significantly improved. And when I saw this, I had two feelings. I had one feeling was, as a dancer, I knew that dance was this incredibly powerful thing. But as a scientist, I was extraordinarily skeptical. I thought, how can it be the case that when people with a neurodegenerative disorder, how can it be that when those people take part in tango dancing classes, why should that lead to an improvement in their performance, which is deteriorated as a function of due to damage in the brain? So I was skeptical. And so I started doing research into the relationship between dancing and Parkinson's disease. And through that long series of research, we found these amazing effects. And these amazing effects apply not only to people with Parkinson's, but also to people without Parkinson's as well. It really is extraordinary. So as I said at the very beginning, we know that when people move together, it leads to extraordinary things. So we know, for instance, when people move their bodies together and they move in synchrony. Oh, by the way, my camera's wobbling because it's on a stand and I've got a bit of a sprung floor. So every time I move, then the camera moves. So I apologize. It's not an earthquake. It's just I'm having a groove and it's making the camera wobble. So I apologize for that. So wait. So that's, I was telling you about this, the social aspect of dancing. When people move together and they dance together, it leads to four amazing things. People report liking each other more. They trust each other more. They feel more similar in terms of their values. And also then, they're more likely to show pro-social behavior. So socially, when we get people dancing together, it leads to these four things. We know in terms of thinking, when people move their body, it changes the way they think and solve problems. And different types of movement have different impacts on the way they think and solve problems. If you move your body in an improvised way, it has one impact on one type of thinking, and moving more in a structured way has a different effect on your mind. Extraordinary. We know that there's a relationship between dance and people's physical health. Even things like cardiovascular disease is amazing. When people dance, it has an impact on their heart and their brain. And finally, on their emotions. With people with Parkinson's, without Parkinson's disease, people who are depressed or people who are feeling the blues, when people dance, it lifts their mood. But it lifts their positive mood and it suppresses their negative mood. Their levels of anger and frustration become reduced and the positive moods go up. It's just extraordinary. So based on all of that research and all of that science, I wanted the world to know more about this. And that's why I wrote The Dance Cure. And what I really want to try to achieve with The Dance Cure is I want the world to be dancing more. And I want dance to be much more of a normal part of our human life. I want people to be able to groove down to the bus stop without anyone thinking it's unusual. I want people at work, rather than going for a coffee, to go for a bit of a boogie. And I want people to groove more in lots of different ways as part of their life. I'd love that to be much more normalized than us uptight as we are at the moment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to read you, if you don't mind, just a paragraph of my book. And I'm going to start off by reading, this is from chapter 1, My Story. And I just want to explain to you how dancing feels to me. Chapter 1, My Story. When I dance, I feel different in lots of ways. I am more aware of my emotions. I find it easier to relate to people. My mind feels less cluttered and, perhaps most importantly, I feel more me. When I'm moving, listening to music, feeling the groove, jumping, turning, bouncing, and preparing to do a double pirouette, I have a feeling of completeness. The world looks, sounds, and feels different. My lungs and heart fill up on an expansive breath, and I float, fly, and feel completely free. I also think best when I'm moving. Sitting still never came naturally to me. I fidget, twitch, and get distracted by sounds, lights, smells, and the feelings of clothes on my body. When my body is still, my mind races from one thought to another, turning at tangents. Moving gives my thoughts an order and a shape. So there we are. I hope that gives you a flavour of what the Dance Cure is about. And
Peter, it absolutely does. And not only that, it makes me want to ask you to make your next book be called The Reading Cure. Your enthusiasm but seriously, the points you make about coming to reading from not reading is somehow so much more interesting than somebody who just started reading at 2.5 and never realized there was any difficulty with it. Because it gives a real insight. There was a child once who was born deaf, dumb and blind and regained her senses at 19 and was asked, which of your senses do you value most? And she said, well, sound is wonderful. Being able to see a flower is magic. She said, but best of all was being able to name the flower and name the bird that was singing. In other words, language and naming things, the naming of parts, was just this wonderful way of seeing the world. And we had a writer on earlier in the festival who said, how can you understand the world without reading? Yeah. And of course, many people can't, but it is, as you've shown, a tremendous asset, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, reading is transformative because so much of the world requires us to read, and also stimulates your imagination in lots of different ways too. So the way I thought pre-reading versus the way I think post-reading is very different. And I think the two of those, I mean, sometimes we get stuck in a bubble where we prioritize reading and we think that's the preeminent way of gathering information. But just having those two ways of getting information, either through the body and experiencing the world through the way we move through it, but then having an intellectual movement through the written word, those two things coming together. When I discovered that, it was just fantastic. Well, to experience that, to discover it, but just it was a personal discovery, made life very, very different.
Fantastic. I've slightly switched the conversation to reading instead of dance. Naughty me, but then I like reading. But Festival Follow asked me to ask you the following question, and it comes up in your book, and she'd seen it in your book. And that is, we do many things in childhood. For example, we'll sing happily if we're told to sing at primary school. We'll dance. Oh, the whole class will dance if told to dance. Or even if not told, they'll dance on the playground. So there are things we do in childhood that we then are more restrained about as we get older, which is part of what people sometimes call maturity, restraint, appropriate behavior. Well, don't dance in the dining room, go and dance somewhere else or something like that. But I wonder, why do we lose these things that come to us so easily? And in writing, which is what I'm most interested in, is another one of those things. People become inhibited strangely, and they lose a sense of freedom. I mean, is that the proper part of growing up, or is something else going on? You're a psychologist.
Yeah, well, I think it's part of, well, we do close down. It happens with all of our creativity. We tend to lose our creativity. We tend to lose those creative juices. Well, actually, that we don't lose them, but we put them. Now, some people come to me with dancing issues. They say, you know, I can't dance. I feel too self-conscious to dance. And the reason a lot of people don't dance is because they feel self-conscious. They feel they're being judged. They feel they're not competent enough to do it. Now, I mean, I love shows like Strictly Come Dancing, but one of the negatives associated with shows like that is that we think it's appropriate to judge people on the basis of the way they move their body. And it's appropriate for us to give them a score of 2 or 3, and it's appropriate for us to laugh at people when they dance. Yes. Now, a lot of those experiences are the experiences that the reasons people give for not dancing. I've done some very large scale surveys, one up to 14,000 people, and others of over thousands of people, asking them why they do and don't dance. And some of the reasons they give for not dancing are because of the self-consciousness and because of the idea of display. And some people feel that dance belongs to some people and not to other people, which is crazy. So they might think that you need to be young, or you need to be female, or you need to have a certain body shape and a body size to be able to dance, or you need to have a certain degree of flexibility. But none of those things matter. To dance isn't to perform. I mean, of course, performing in the Royal Opera House stage is one type of dancing, or performing in the Blackpool Tower Ballroom on Strictly is another type of dancing. But those are extreme forms of dancing, which almost aren't dancing. Dancing is that natural urge to feel the music. We know the brain parts that are responsible in turning auditory stimuli into movements, and we all have those. We don't lose them. And of course, what we do lose is the freedom of the expression. And so this is why I say in the book, what we should be doing is to feel that movement again. You close your eyes, lay on the bed, put some music on, and just let the music start to make your body twitch. It hasn't got to be a big movement. Just feel that urge in your body and allow that then to become larger and larger and larger, and switch off the self-critical aspect of creativity, because it's no use. All of that constraint literally does you more harm than good.
Yeah.
So
that leads me to another question that really is linked to this. It's just pushing this question a bit further. And that is the question of structured creative activities and unstructured ones. In other words, in writing, we speak of formal poetry, we have villanelles, and we have sonnets and so on. They have names, they have structure. And then we speak of free verse, people can go for. And in music, there's something people call classical music, and others they call jazz, and then they call just free music or something. And I imagine it's the same in dancing. And what I've learned in writing is that structure, discipline, which sounds like a very militaristic word, but is actually a wonderful word, gives us freedom, a certain kind of freedom that freedom on its own doesn't give us. Now, how does that work with dance? And that is linked to this question of when people think, well, I can't do the steps, so I can't do the dance. Where's the balance here?
Okay, so let's imagine, so in dance, well, we think about that a lot in dance, and we talk about structured dance versus improvised dance. Yeah. So a structured dance might be, we have a set of movement patterns and we have to all do them at the same time. I'm going to put my book down. So we go, 5, 6, 7, 8. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right. So that would be a structured set of movements. We're all doing the same movement at the same time. We learn that pattern. Versus an improvised movement where we can just move any part of our body in any way that we like, and we do something different and unexpected. And we're doing something that's unplanned, and we're creating the movement pattern on the spur of the moment. Now, of course, what people find really hard is that little tiny children are great at just improvising. They just improvise their bodies. I've got a 7-year-old at the moment who's discovered tap dancing. And for the last year, really, he's been tap dancing without any structure at all. He just moves his feet. He says, yeah, I'm tap dancing. And he is tap dancing. He's doing that. It's completely free. Then, of course, as soon as we then start to try to impose form onto that, so we say, okay, we're going to take the movements you do and we're going to make one a shuffle and then a ball change. It kills his creative juices completely. Now, sometimes we need some degree of structure to help people improvise within that structure, because it's really difficult as adults to say, let's improvise, let's create something new on the spur of the moment and go create. Everyone goes, oh no, I have no idea where to start. They simply don't know where to start. But if we give people some loose frameworks, then they can improvise within that framework. I do one dance, and if I was here with you now, I'd do it with everyone here. I would have loved to have done this, is I teach people the Charleston. And so there's some really basic steps we can do with the Charleston. You can't see my feet, but I'm moving them in a kind of Charleston-like way at the moment. And I could teach you 3 or 4 basic Charleston steps, and then we just improvise with them. So you can do them big, you can do them small, you can put a little bit of character into them, you can create and you can embellish them in lots of different ways. And this is a way that we can give people a basic framework and allow them to be creative and expressive around that framework. And that helps people find that creative zizz again, which is wonderful. But of course, what we sometimes also feel is if we become too punitive and we say to people, right, we're going to teach you a waltz, and it's really important that you get the rise and the fall on your foot, and you've got to do exactly the right timing. These kind of constraints can make people think, oh, blimey, I'm not good enough at this. I'm going to get it wrong, and my partner's going to feel I've got it wrong, and everyone's going to know I've got it wrong, and it's going to be a 3 instead of a 7. And, oh. So in dance, absolutely, we have a relationship between improvised movement and structured movement. We also know that both of those 2 different types of movement have an impact on the way people think and solve problems. But in terms of allowing people that freedom of movement, we can give them some constraint and then allow them to embellish that constraint, which becomes a bit improvisational. And then we can build up the improvisation more and more and more and more.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about dancing is that writing is a solitary business. It's a solitary, it works best when you do it on your own. But, the flash mob dancing at Antwerp station, running, which I like very much, when it's done with people, is so much more exhilarating and so much more wonderful.
Yeah.
But the question I really want to ask you is, why is it, what is it about dance? And regimes have burnt books, regimes have stopped certain kind of music, but what is it about dance that certain religions, certain regimes don't like? Because it's men and women having a good time, expressing themselves, falling in love even through dance, getting healthy, all these things. I mean, there are so many things in your book that are positive. Why are there certain forms of governmental control over dance, usually to do with religion?
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. It does seem to be the case that people want to constrain our natural urges. Now, of course, there's some wonderful science which shows that the way we move our body is linked to our hormones and our genes. And one use of dance, according to Charles Darwin, is as part of the mate selection process. So just like some birds, we communicate our hormones and our genes through the way we move our body. And of course, what's amazing is that when we watch people dancing, we perceive all this information. We're receiving all this extraordinary information about their hormones and their genes and how much, well, according to Darwin, it's all about this mating. Now, of course, if you've got these amazing urges going on, then certain puritanical religions didn't like that at all. They didn't want people falling in love. They didn't want it. It was seen as sexual. It was seen as, really as part of a natural urge. And during the Victorian times, some of these urges were just seen as something that really shouldn't be displayed at all. So yeah, some of the puritanical religions banned dancing because they felt that it was, there was too much on display, and people lost control of themselves when they danced. I mean, there are still some religions now which see dance as being something that only women can do, but only women can do it when they're together, for instance, and they can't do it in front of men. And so that kind of sexualized part of dance and that part of the mating and the display function, hasn't been liked.
Another thing that may, of course, disturb them also is that you want an obedient people, and you talk about dance helping self-confidence and the way you carry yourself, and it can't it also lead to sort of swagger, slight cockiness, and maybe that's something that especially maybe the British, we like to be more reserved. All this exhibitionism, and and the way middlebrow people sneer at celebrities, as if being happy with your body and enjoying expressing yourself, there's something wrong with it. So we don't want too much confidence, Peter.
Well,
or do we?
I think we do, because I think some of that sneering, that kind of looking down at people because of the way they move their body, leads to all kinds of body issues in people. People have got all kinds of hang-ups about their body and about their anxiety. We're in the middle of an epidemic, not just of the coronavirus, but of anxiety and depression. People perceive themselves not to be good enough. They question themselves. And of course, the more you have people looking at them and saying, you shouldn't be behaving like this, your body shouldn't be on display, you shouldn't move your body, you shouldn't display your confidence, we want a subservient people. I think that's having a terrible impact on society. So I would say, yes, let's go. Let's move our body. Let's get it moving. We know that when we move our body, it changes the way we think and feel, and it changes our emotions. And if we could walk with a swagger, I mean, some people may not like it, but we're not trying to force everybody to swagger. It's like suggesting that everyone must have short hair on a short back and sides, and we mustn't allow anybody to display themselves in the way they want to display themselves. There's an old-fashioned song, Toya Wilcox, I think this is ages me now, and the lyric went, well, so what if I dye my hair? I've still got a brain up there. I want to be free. And I think the same is about our bodies as well. I'm not suggesting that we should be exhibitionistic in displaying parts of our bodies that we don't want to do. I'm not suggesting that in any way at all. But I do think the way we move our body, because it's so fundamental to our psychological being and our makeup, all the positives that come from that, I think the less inhibited we are, the better.
And Peter's book is great. It's full of it's actually even full of riddles, and it even, as you can see from what Peter says, he even makes claims that dancing can be problem solving. It can solve conflicts. It can solve sadness and melancholy, all sorts of things that it can solve. And I'm really convinced by it. I mean, I have some evidence, a little bit of myself, but this is such an informative and such an enjoyable book. And I want to ask Peter the last two questions. The penultimate one is, so I come from a generation where the first uninhibited dancing I did was the twist. And then as I got older, I kind of do dad dancing. Yeah. And or that's what it feels like to me, that sort of sneer, which is not a very nice one. But I shuffle, but I feel it all through my body. I feel fantastic. I think I'm, anyway, we won't go there. But what is it that stops people dancing, especially in view of the fact that it's so good for us? Why, what stops us?
Okay. The main thing that stops us is a lack of confidence and a perceived lack of competence. And sometimes society stops us. But that whole idea of dad dancing is just wonderful. We know that in middle-aged men, there can be all kinds of health issues associated with being a middle-aged person, not just a man. But a lot of men are also intimidated by moving their bodies. But we know from all kinds of work that when those very people move their body in a free way and do dad dancing is fantastic. I wish we could change the definition of dad dancing from something that's negative to something that's positive. Because when you get people losing their inhibitions, it doesn't matter if they're the only people that can hear the music that they're dancing to. It doesn't matter if they can only move one part of their body and not the other bits, and nothing seems to be coordinated. It doesn't matter at all. Well, in fact, it does matter, because it was doing brilliant things for all of their mind and their body and their hearts and their brain. So it leads to all these fantastic things. So I think one of the problems is we have a perception. Also, culturally, we're cutting dancing from schools. So many schools now have cut back on their dance programs. They've made dance part of PE, and it's not compulsory. It's just part of a PE offering sometimes. People don't know how to dance with each other anymore. It's not part of the society. We need to change that. We need to have more dancing in our society. And the more we normalize it, the more we'll all reap the benefits from it.
My last question to you, Peter, thanks very much. My last question to you is to do with, we had another author at the festival who spoke about being over 50 and over 60 now is the best time to be over 50 and 60 that there's been for many generations, which is a sort of strange thing to say in view of the pandemic that's on at the moment, but nevertheless it's meant in a general context. And there are great claims made nowadays for running for over 60 and 70-year-olds, for veterans tennis and so on. So there are lots of claims for music and so on. What can dance do for people as they get a little bit stiffer, as they, because we know how well young people dance. Can dancing do anything to prolong a healthy life?
Yes, it can. We know that dancing has these amazing positive benefits on our health and well-being. And the reason we get these benefits is because of those 4 things you get from dancing: the social, the cognitive, the physical, and the emotional. Lots of other sports that you do might have 1 or 2 of those elements. They might be very physical, such that they get your heart rate pumping. They might even be social, but they're not very cognitive or they're not very emotional. We know that this combination of the 4 things you get from dance it's that package that it does the good for us. And what's really important is to take away an idea of ability from dancing. As we get older, of course, our bodies change. Bits get stiffer, bits get, some bits stop working. Your range of movement can be reduced. There's a whole set of stuff that changes. But from a dance perspective, it doesn't matter. Of course, what we do, we adapt our dances so that if you have a balance problem, we're not going to have people turning and doing pirouettes. And so we can adapt movement to people regardless of whatever physical abilities they have. So as we get into older age, it's really important that we continue to keep moving, and it's important that we continue to keep socializing, and it's important that we keep thinking, and it's important that we keep expressing our emotions. And dancing gives us a gateway to explore all of those 4 things. And that's why dance has been shown, sometimes above other forms of physical activity, of being such a powerful thing to do.
It's interesting. One of the things you listed there was it's important that we keep thinking. And in your book, you say I think best when I'm moving. And you know, Peter, you're in very good company, because Friedrich Nietzsche said, the best thoughts come when the body is in motion. And there's such a lot of truth in that. There's such a lot of truth. And there's so many truths in Peter's book. I love it. It's a wonderful, good read. And it's the kind of book that you want to read bits out to people at mealtimes, if only to do some of the puzzles and the riddles and the problem solving that it gives you, and the squares and the two brothers on a crossroads and so on. It's just full of good stuff. And Peter, thank you very much for coming to our festival in this virtual way. And we hope to see you in Swindon in a real way. But for now, I hope everybody is well at home watching this program, watching this little transmission of ours. Until we meet again, keep well. But most of all, a Swindon Spring Festival thank you to Dr. Peter Lovatt. Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I hope it's just a rain check. And one day, I hope we will have the chance to dance together.
Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this virtual session at the Swindon Spring Festival of Literature and the Arts 2020. We do hope you enjoyed it. And we also hope that you will join us for the rest of this virtual festival. Here for you are details of the author you have just watched, their book, and our online information. Thank you very much for joining us, and keep well till we meet again.